How many of you here have ever driven on the left-hand side of the road?
Only when drunk.
Well, I've driven on the left-hand side of the road almost half of my life while growing up in Jamaica. But only as a passenger. I never actually drove a car while living there. I got my driver's license while I left Jamaica and moved to New York City. I could go into that story, but that's a whole other story by itself. But driving in Jamaica has a few challenges besides driving on the left-hand side of the road. Now, when I was there, part of the testing process involved your road test. And in order to do your road test, you had to actually pass your road test driving a manual transmission vehicle or a stick shift. So for those of you that don't know how to drive a stick shift, the process is quite simple. All you have to do is put the clutch in, put the car in gear, go ahead, let the clutch out, put the gas down, and here you go. Real simple, right? But I thought it was so simple because I read about it, and I thought, I like cars, and I said, well, that sounds pretty simple. I could do that. And I read a book, and I gave the instructions, and I said, I could do this. And I started telling everybody, yeah, I could drive. I'm 10 years old, but I can drive. I can pass that test. If you give me that test right now, I will pass it. So a friend of mine, well, actually, a guy that liked my older sister, he was a bus driver, he wanted to impress my sister, so he says, I tell you what, if you could drive my car, if you're so sure of yourself that you can drive, I'll give you a shot at driving. And I go, okay, sure, whenever. And he goes, okay, yeah, let's go. And I go, where's your car? He goes, you're going to drive this bus here. I go, 40-passenger bus, you want me to drive that? And he goes, yeah, if you could drive anything, right? And I go, yeah, sure. So I get in the bus, I put the clutch in, I put the bus in first gear, I let out the clutch, and all of a sudden it's rattling and it's shaking and I'm thrown about in my seat. So I said to myself, what am I doing wrong here? And by the time I could think that, it's silence. I stalled it out. So I said to myself, okay, what can I do different this time? So I decided to go back in again. I put the clutch in, start the bus up, I go ahead, put it back in gear, and I said, you know what, I'm going to just pop the clutch out as quick as I can. I go out and I pop the clutch, and I'm thrown about even more violently. I'm thrust against my seat and stall it out again. So I look behind me to see what's going on behind me, and I see my sister smiling. I see the bus driver, he's smiling, and my friend that was with me, he's sitting on the back seat of the bus. So at this time I go, do I get a third try? And he goes, no, get out of my bus, you can't drive. So I never got a chance to actually learn to drive in Jamaica. The second part of getting your driver's license in Jamaica involves driving with a permit. So when you're given a permit, what happens is you have to actually drive along, and this is similar in most other places, you actually drive along with another driver in the car, and while you're driving in that car, what happens is before you're actually let on the road, you actually have to take this big white placard with a giant L on it and put one in the front of the car and one in the back of the car. And you can't get on the road without that. That's your indication to everyone that you're a learner, that you're learning to drive. And that's what you're called. You're called a learner. So while you're driving along, I thought to myself, that's got to be the most embarrassing thing. First of all, I can't drive. Now you want me to broadcast it to everybody on the road that I cannot drive, right? So the thing about it that you have to think about, though, is the irony of it is when I did go back to Jamaica and I was driving in Jamaica, I was a tourist. And as a tourist in Jamaica, you're actually regarded even less than a learner. You're that person that's driving, you don't know where you're going, you're driving on the wrong side of the road, and while you're driving on the wrong side of the road, you're trying to find landmarks, you're trying to find out where you're going, you're trying to make sure you stay on that left-hand side of the road. So Jamaicans don't regard tourists in a very positive manner, much like how we regard snowbirds here in Florida. The third part of getting your driver's license in Jamaica is actually part of the road test. It's the final test what you're given is, you're given a car parked on a ramp. It's parked on a ramp, and they park it on the ramp, you pull the handbrake up, and you turn the car off, and they go, okay, go ahead. Now what you have to do is you have to start that car up, drive that car up the ramp. If it rolls back, you fail. If it stalls out, you fail. So there's a few different ways you can get yourself out of that predicament and get that car going. And I've used two techniques whenever I'm driving a manual transmission, because I like driving my manual transmission. I like driving my manual transmission almost as much as Jerry likes snakes. So one technique I've used is you let the clutch out just enough so the clutch starts to engage, and what actually happens is that's enough power between the engine and the transmission to actually keep that car steady. Now you can take your foot off of the brake, put it on the gas, and then you continue releasing your clutch all the way out, and then the car goes off. Right? So, right? Yeah? Well, that technique is great if you have a car with a really powerful engine. It's terrible if you have a little Honda Civic, which is what I learned to drive on. It would stall out on you every time you did it. I know, because I was in the Bronx with it one summer, and I stalled out probably 5 or 6 times at one light. The other technique is you can use your handbrake. If you use your handbrake as a brake pedal, then you can still operate the two pedals while you're holding the third pedal, which is your brake, with your handbrake. If your timing is just right and you let out your handbrake and you let out your clutch with your gas, then you can drive on nice and smooth and you can pass your test and be qualified to drive in Jamaica. But I have good news. If all of you here have your driver's license, guess what you could do? You could drive in Jamaica. Because if you have a driver's license from America, you are free to roam the streets of Jamaica and wreak havoc everywhere. Now, if I've convinced you that it's safe to go to Jamaica and drive, be forewarned. There's a few techniques that I employ every time I go to Jamaica. One, you want to make sure when you're driving to stay conscious of everything that's going on around you. That's the same thing you would do here. The second thing you want to do is you want to be very careful whenever you're making a right turn, because those are the times you're more likely to find yourself on the right-hand side of the street. And 3, if you go to Jamaica and drive, please don't do the normal things that tourists do, and the Jamaicans over there will be very thankful for that.